Oi oi, it's your boy, the Norma Dumont of placing too much faith in Rob Font. Jack Slack, it's the Jack Slack podcast, and it's Monday the 3rd of October. Getting a little spooky around here. Might have to try and work that into some themed content. Are the kids still playing Five Nights at Freddy's? I could do that, alongside the seafood playthrough that I've been promising for, is it a year now? At any rate, there was some fights over the weekend. There was actually a great deal of fights. A great many fights. And a lot of surprisingly good ones, and a lot of ones that were low-key bangers, and a lot of shit ones. And I don't think I'm going to have time to talk about all the things I want to today, but it's okay because next weekend's card is headlined by Vivian Araujo for some reason. But again, it's kind of like this card. There's other stuff going on it that you're going, oh, that's quite good, actually. I have no idea what they do. Well, I do know what they're doing. They're leaning into the here's two attractive lasses on the poster. But in addition to that, there was a one event which I haven't fully caught up on, so I'll talk about that on the Boycast. I did see Angela Lee lost and immediately complained about the rules. Because one is always going on about Bushido, and the Lee siblings are always going on about Bushido while cheating. And then as soon as they lose, they throw a tantrum. It's fantastic. Got to take it to the board. Get it overturned. But in addition to one, there was a Bellator event and a UFC event. I might talk about the Bellator event because I'm assuming, riskily, probably not much risk, to be honest, this week. We're going to get like 10,000 listens. But I'm assuming that most people who find this podcast are going to be returning listeners rather than people who are desperate to know about the ramifications of Mackenzie Dern versus Xiaonan. So we'll start with Bellator because it does me points of psychic damage every time I watch it. This one did nothing to break that streak. I was going insane watching it. Not only do they have the most asinine commentating from Big John and then punditry from Josh Thompson, but there's a good 10, 15, 20 minutes between fights. It was 20 minutes into the broadcast of the main card before the fight started. But the reason I want to lead with them is because I place far more respect on Patricio Pitbull's title than I do on anything going on in that UFC card. However, Patricio Pitbull had a very boring fight. He's a very short man. He's a very short featherweight. Did he have one fight at lightweight? 2 fights at lightweight. One where he lost to Benson Henderson and one where he smoked Michael Chandler in a few seconds. But you know, that's Michael Chandler. Every third fight he's going to lose. So you just have to catch him at the right time, really. But Patricio Pitbull is a tiny, tiny man. And he's tiny at featherweight. And Adam Borics is a huge dude at featherweight. And Adam Borics came out not knowing at all how to use any of the advantages he had. So he was bigger. He was seemingly stronger. He was considerably longer, and he threw like 3 jabs in the whole fight, didn't kick at all, was out-kicked and out-jabbed by Pitbull, who's a very low-output fighter to begin with. And then whenever he loaded up his big flying knee that he's famous for, this is the thing, if you get famous for a flying knee, you've already fucked up, because that should be something that the opponent doesn't expect to be coming. If they're constantly expecting it, then you're never going to catch him with it. So he throws a flying knee in the first round and immediately gets left hooked in the head while in the air, like Stefan Struve. And the Stefan Struve comparisons are constant with this, because the man is just has no idea how to use the gifts that he's got, frame-wise. It's a marvel. I watched this dude beat Mads Bennell, and I was like, damn, looking quite good. And then in this one, he just did not have any idea what to do. But yeah, flying knee, gets left hooked, falls to the mat, gets controlled by Pitbull. In the third round, I think it was, he jumped into a flying knee. Pitbull just caught him and turned him over like it was a double leg. The guy just gracefully put himself on Pitbull's shoulders. And then he did the same thing in the fifth round too. And then anytime they entered to the clinch, Pitbull would hit him with like an Uchimata or an outside trip and sling around this huge dude effortlessly. It was super boring. Pitbull didn't do much, but Pitbull never does much. You know, Pitbull is about limiting the engagements and then landing big counters. But in this one, he was kind of about like, oh, you seem to have fallen on your back there, mate, off your attempted flying knee. It'd be a shame if I let you up, so I'll just keep you there. Or hop on your back as you get up. Crowd were booing. I was booing at home. It was dull. but it was the most important thing happening this weekend. And Patricia Pitbull naturally came out afterwards and was like, the UFC are afraid to co-promote with Bellator and have me fight Volkanovski. And you're like, you could leave at any time, especially now that we've seen the payouts from this event, because it was in California. Always a mistake. Never run an event in California, because then people can see the purses. That's the mistake the UFC made with Ngannou, because all week people were going, there were those simps going, oh, Ngannou gets tons of money from the UFC. I don't know why he's making a fuss. And then it came out that he was making $600,000 for his show and win, while raising tens of millions of dollars for the UFC on that event. But Patricio Pitbull is the longest-serving Bellator fighter. He is the best Bellator fighter in Bellator's history. He's the reigning featherweight champion. He's their only double champion, and he's getting paid $150,000 flat. Now, I like that Bellator pays its fighters flat, because if you're hiring a fighter because they're good, you're doing it under the assumption that they want to win. It's such a bollocks way of looking at things that people, if we didn't take away half the money they can earn if they lose, why would they fight to win? I don't know, to prospects of better pay later on. I'm a big believer in giving a flat win bonus and giving a bigger proportion of the fighter's purse as as show money. But anyway, it was hilarious because, why would the UFC co-promote with Bellator when Bellator can't get 100,000 people to watch Patricio Pitbull, their best and most exciting fighter a lot of the time? That being said, I still think Pitbull is would be an awesome addition to the UFC featherweight division, because the UFC featherweight division is a bizarre one where you've got guys like Evloev coming up who aren't properly ranked yet, and you've got guys like Ortega and Yair Rodriguez and Korean Zombie taking up the top 10 when, Korean Zombie is completely past it. Brian Ortega's not really got that many great wins, and very flawed as a fighter. And Yair Rodriguez Yair Rodriguez is doing all right. But, it's a sort of a very aged or aging top 10 where not a lot's happening. So he'd fit right in there. But on the rest of this card, there was some pretty fun stuff, actually. The reason that I wanted to start with Bellator, aside from Patricio Pitbull's title. But AJ McKee versus Spike Carlisle, great fun. AJ McKee, generally very exciting, which is hilarious because he's the son of Anthony McKee, who was famously the most boring fighter in the UFC and also the only man to lose to Shinya Aoki on strikes. But AJ McKee, his dad taught him really well. He's like a grappling savant, really scrambly, great takedowns, decent striker. And Spike Carlisle is, just actually insane. Insane as a fighter and insane as a person. The UFC dropped him basically because his Twitter is just full of ultra-Catholic but also anti-Semitic tweets and shit like that. He's a very peculiar character. But as a fighter, he's like the white crazy horse. He's all over the place. He's slamming people. He's going as hard as hell, and he's gassing out. So he was on a 5-fight finishing streak. He looked really quite good since leaving the UFC, and his losses in the UFC were to Quarantillo and Algio, both by decision. Almost impossible to finish, and that proved to be the case for McKee, because Spike Carlisle came out all over him, very quickly got turned around and then hit with a good left straight, I think it was, and then McKee took top position and kept trying to submit him and got in his back and stuff, but Carlisle just kept turning to his hands and knees, standing up, shaking McKee off, deep in rear naked chokes at several points, and just didn't tap, didn't give up, pulled the hands away from his head. He's an animal, and it was really quite cool. People are saying, like, did AJ McKee's stock fall? Because Spike Carlisle is good but not great, is how I describe it. He's like a lot of fighters. When people get obsessed with the levels in this thing, they don't consider that there are fighters who are dangerous. That you have to fight sensibly, or you have to fight. If you get into a fight with them in their sort of fight, you're gonna have a hard time. And it doesn't mean that you're a bad fighter. It means that you fought them where they're good, and that's kind of what happened in this fight. AJ McKee got into a whirlwind match with Carlisle. Another example that we're going to talk about later is Francisco Trinaldo. If you fight him in his sort of fight, you're gonna have a really hard time. Doesn't matter if he's old. Doesn't matter if he's not really a welterweight. So, as a big AJ McKee hater, because he's always talking such nonsense about how he's going to hang around in Bellator for a bit and then go and take 2 titles in the UFC or some shit. I do think it's harsh on him to overlook that Spike Carlisle is a difficult opponent, and he also fought him in a fight that really was sort of Carlisle's pace. The other one that I really enjoyed on this card was God, you have to scroll through all their post limbs as well. Fucking Bellator. The other one I really enjoyed on this card was Juan Archuleta versus Enrique Barzola. Juan Archuleta, for a long time, I mean, I wrote something about him back in the day, right at the start of the Patreon, but for a long time I tried to be excited for him, and then I watched him against Sergio Pettis, and he made Sergio Pettis look like Canelo. Like Sergio Pettis couldn't miss against him, and Sergio Pettis isn't great. But in this one, Archuleta looked phenomenal on the feet. He's a stablemate of TJ Dillashaw, so he looks like someone trying to do TJ Dillashaw, but not really getting what makes TJ Dillashaw so good. But in this one, he was pumping a 1-2, getting in, and then he'd pivot around his lead foot, sort of turn around to the side of Barzola and hit him with a left hook. And he traded that off with stepping around to the side of Barzola and picking up a single leg. And it worked really well. This 1-2 cut an angle, either come in with a left hook through the front of their guard, which is difficult to deal with, or pick up the single leg. And it sort of combined with the TJ Dillashaw 1-2 step through and sort of hook their leg with yours and fall on it into a trip. So he was doing all of that, which was really nice. He'd sometimes exit the other direction and come back. It was a really mobile performance, looked good. Barzola had his better moments by doing exactly what we always say. When you're dealing with someone who's a smooth mover, grab a hold of him and hockey punch him. Because it doesn't matter how smooth your head movement is or how neat your footwork is if you can't detach from the guy who's throwing punches at you. And of course, in Barzola's shoes, you just have to punch to your own hand if you're holding their head. The takedowns and scrambling in this fight were awesome. There was a load of stuff I wanted to talk about, but I can't remember now. But yeah, it was a really active, scrambly fight. Lots of great get-ups. Archuleta would hit a perfect takedown, catch Barzola dead to right, get in on his hips, bundle him over, and Barzola would get up again almost immediately. Yeah, neither man could get each other on the floor for a very long time. And it was just very enjoyable. I highly recommend you go watch that fight. And I believe, even though Archuleta got the decision, he won the first 2 rounds. Barzola ended the round on the back looking for the choke. So the last round, that is. So it was a really competitive bout. And Barzola's done that with everyone he fights. He's just a scrappy dude. But that's all that was worth watching from Bellator. So let's talk about this UFC card. Headlined by Mackenzie Dern versus Xiaonan. High strangeness going on here because it was the UFC Apex, and it turns out that Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook bought out most of the seats to sit ringside for the Mackenzie Dern fight because he fancies Mackenzie Dern. So this is what everyone pointed out. He follows Mackenzie Dern on Facebook. He seems to be on Instagram or whatever. He seems to be a big Mackenzie Dern fan. And Mackenzie Dern was the one that announced originally that he was going to be there and had bought out most of the seats, and Dana came out and denied that. So this dude is simping for Mackenzie Dern, and he bought tickets and sat there with his wife looking at the fighter he fancies, which is, I feel like I'd get in trouble if I did that, but I'm not worth billions of dollars. If you haven't seen Zuckerberg's training footage, fantastic. He's into MMA now. Dern versus Xiaonan. I was really surprised by this because, Xiaonan has been such a fish on the ground. But Mackenzie Dern, her takedowns are dreadful. For a fighter of that ability. For someone it's kind of like why I'm always talking about Brian Ortega and the massive hole in his game. If so much of your game relies on or if you've got such a strong submission game, why would you not have something that gets you there? It's like having a gun for home defense and then keeping all the bullets in a safe. It's just like, what are you doing? That defeats the purpose of having it there. Unless that's what you're supposed to do legally in some states. But, what I mean is she has this incredibly deadly skill set, a particular set of skills, and she can't, for love nor money, get the opponent into it. And this is the thing, like, people have been moaning about her shit striking or whatever. It's the same people who were simping about it a couple of fights ago, by the way. But I'm going to say what I've always said. Jason Perillo has taught her a really nice jab. It is a good jab. The problem is that everything after that is awful. If you watch her throw her right hand, it's wide and miles away from the opponent's head. If you watch her throw her left hook, she drops it down to the floor, holds her chin up in the air, swings it leaning back. And then on top of that, she doesn't double jab. She doesn't feint her way in and then jab. You know, it's possible to win a fight with just a great jab, but she's got this great jab that's just hanging alone in the air, not doing anything. So she's not going to fake her and then jab her. She's using the jab as the only thing she does to lead. And then Yan Xiaonan's standing too far away for it to actually land. So instead of like double jabbing, which would be another way of getting in with the jab, she just throws the single jab and then starts swinging with her arms wide, and Xiaonan's picking her off with counters. Now, Yan Xiaonan always been about coming out with the sidekick in the first round, never using the sidekick again, and then just throwing 1-2s and doing a decent job with it. But in this fight, she actually did continue using the sidekick, and I liked it. Also threw some good low kicks, but the 1-2 is her bread and butter. Straight hitting gets boxers plums, and she did fine. I think she outlanded Dern at like a 3-1 clip or something like that. It was a ridiculous margin she was beating her by. And every time Mackenzie Dern got her to the fence, firstly, the ring cutting was not great, which this is all part of it. If your plan is to get someone on the floor and submit them, you, 1, need to be able to cut the cage, 2, need to be able to shoot a takedown into the opponent on the cage, 3, need to get them down off there. And now there's variations there. You could try and shoot a takedown out in the open. You could use reactive doubles. You could use a more upright clinch fighting game plan along the fence. But you need to be able to force that on the opponent. They are not going to, with the exception of a few people, they're not going to make the mistake of just running over the top of you and letting you bundle them to the floor. So if you watch Mackenzie Dern's takedowns in this fight, she jabs towards Yan against the cage, and then she swings her head out all the way out to her right because she's scared of a punch coming back, and then has to bring it in while she runs head down at Xiaonan's hips, and Xiaonan moves and she just runs straight past her into the fence. It's crazy. And this is all stuff that could be done from boxing range. If she could jab and dip, she could come up with her right-handed left hook. She could dip into the opponent's chest and take a clinch. She could dip into the opponent's hips and take a double leg. It's about getting close enough. It's about being comfortable enough. She's developed one really good part of her boxing game and nothing to go around it. Is the problem. What she did have, though, was a really cool guard, which is, that's what she had in her jiu-jitsu career. It's interesting because there are jiu-jitsu guys who, every jiu-jitsu person coming into MMA has one problem, which is getting the opponent down. But there are sort of two types of jiu-jitsu guy. There's the guy who gets top position and is a great guard passer and stuff like that. And they find that if they meet a great wrestler or something or something of that sort, they can't get their A1 ideal game plan working because they can't take him down. Think of Andre Galvao, amazing takedown artist in jiu-jitsu, great top player. MMA career faltered the moment that he met Tyron Woodley, couldn't take him down. And there's tons of examples of that in MMA. Yuri Samosh, amazing takedown artist in jiu-jitsu, met I think it was a Chinese guy in one, random Chinese light heavyweight, able to use the fence to keep himself up. Samosh couldn't get him down. And then there's the other kind of guy who's the guard player, and they're sort of stuffed because it's so hard to pull guard effectively in MMA because everything takes so long, especially when you got punches in, and especially when guys are going to fight like hell to not get submitted. If you lock up a good triangle choke with a minute to spare, guys are going to squirm, they're going to slam you, they're going to hit you in the head with hammer fists that aren't going to knock you out, but they might loosen the choke slightly while you're dealing with them or taking them. Everything takes much longer in MMA, especially guard play. So guards, typically, you want to be able to explode back up to your feet. Well, you want to finesse your way back up to your feet, or you want to catch a nice submission on the way. The submission is the bonus. You saw this in the fight when she sat down on the seated guard, which I believe was a big part of Mackenzie Dern's grappling game as a pure grappler. The koala guard, I think she called it, but sitting up on the leg, the seated guard. And she was trying to... she put in a deep De La Riva hook, which is where your leg goes all the way around your opponent's leg, around the outside, and then comes back in front of their hips. So you've got your foot on the inside of their far thigh, and you can push that leg straight. And it's used a lot to create sweeps, but it also is used a lot to flank around behind the opponent, get to their back, or even attack a leg, the lead leg, that is. But she was threatening to go around to, Yan Xiaonan's back. And on the way, she grabbed the wrist and then she came back on the omoplata. It was a gorgeous move. It's something that I love, inverting as if to go on legs from like a closed guard or something like that. And then when the opponent is pushing you off or trying to do something, you just grab their wrist and you swing back on the omoplata. And for some reason, it isn't expected by most people. But she did a really decent job attacking with that omoplata. But again, the whole sequence took so long, even against Yan Xiaonan, who probably isn't familiar with all the intricacies of Mackenzie Dern's game or the slickness she was attempting, but she was still able to go, no, I don't want that to happen, just tense up and slow things down. Ultimately, for Mackenzie Dern, I saw a lot of people say the hype train's derailed or whatever. I mean, it's still not a great division and she's still got talent. I would want her to work with someone like James Krause or someone like that who emphasizes cage wrestling. Because if she could have got this fight to the cage and clinched up and stayed there and just ground on her and recycled takedowns, it was every attempt she made at a takedown was a big, long run up into a bent over double leg or a dive on a single leg that almost got her turned over. Yeah, it's no secret to be like, yeah, she needs some wrestling, but she needs some wrestling that she can do over and over and over again, because even if you get a great double leg, at some point you're not going to hit it first time, you're not going to hit it second time. What I really like about Krause's guys and the AKA lads too is that they get you to the fence and they just go over and over again, and you don't get a word in edgeways. But good for Yan Xiaonan, because she stopped a load of takedowns, and when it did hit the mat, she defended herself well, and didn't look nearly as bad as she did against Carla Esparza, and her striking was decent, and I'm not going to be super excited for her next fight, but she did what she was supposed to do, or, she did what she wasn't supposed to do, and she won this fight, so good for her. Co-main was Randy Brown versus Francisco Trinaldo. I'm a big Trinaldo boy. Maybe that's actually why Zuckerberg was there, in which case I've changed my mind, and he's cool. But yeah, bit one way. Well, not one way, but he had a lot of trouble negotiating the length and reach, which was predictable. Brown fought orthodox for most of the fight. Typically, Trinaldo has done much better against orthodox fighters than southpaws because he times his big left hand over the top of their right hand or their jab. Brown knocked him down early in the first round. Some interesting wrestling exchanges. Trinaldo got on top in the third and did a little bit of short elbow work, but wasn't enough to make up for 2 rounds of chasing Randy Brown fairly ineffectively. Brown gets the win. I think he's on a 4-fight win streak now, and some of them are pretty good. Raoni Barcelos pretty much stole the show against Trevin Jones. Trevin Jones was billed as a striker and never got anything going back against Barcelos. Barcelos was using a great little step-up calf kick because I believe Jones was the southpaw and Barcelos was the orthodox. The step-up calf kick is something that you very seldom see done well. The guy I'd always point to as a good example of it is Arnold Allen, particularly against Gilbert Melendez. But Gilbert Melendez had a terrible history with the calf kick. He never learned to deal with it. But yeah, you have to step up with your rear leg and then throw the calf kick. So it's a little bit slower, well, considerably slower than just standing in a nice long stance and then kicking as soon as the opponent's foot comes close enough with your rear leg. But he did great work with that. He'd throw high kicks to keep Jones's guard up, and then he'd throw body kicks off his rear leg to hurt him. Every time Jones came in to strike, he'd duck down into the middle of Jones's chest or just do a little level change, throw a little right hook across the top with his rear hand. Lovely. His left hook was great in this one. Last week I got a question about the left hook against southpaws. I said, yeah, it's a real pain in the ass because it's so short and it comes over your shoulder. And your shoulder, if you were a southpaw fighting another southpaw fighter, your shoulder would protect you from their left hand a lot of the time because it's so far their hand has to come and you just need to shrug your shoulder up to your jawline, duck down behind it. But against an orthodox fighter, you assume that your shoulder is going to be between their lead hand and your chin, but it gets so close to you that all that has to happen is your chin has to lag a little bit behind, or your shoulder has to drop a little bit low when you're in exchange, and you'll get chinned by it. It's a really tricky punch that it is a horrible punch for the southpaw, and then conversely, the southpaw right hook is a horrible punch for the orthodox fighter. So Barcelos was doing great work with those, getting takedowns. Jones looked very lost on the floor, which it was the evidence that he was the striker, a striker, because he wasn't winning the striking. But when he got to the mat, Barcelos hit him with a great right hand, took him down with a double leg, and went immediately to mount. Well, he might have turned the guy's head upside down with the punch, but there were lots of moments in this. In the first round, Barcelos was in Jones's half guard, and the corner of Jones was saying, like, open your legs, get up. And the moment he opened his legs, he didn't like turn into Barcelos to try and get to his hands and knees. He just sort of opened his legs, and Barcelos put his own knee into mount. He was just like, oh, free mount, lovely. In fact, in the first round, Barcelos tries an Ezekiel choke with his glove, which I don't know the rules on. I don't think you're allowed to grab your own glove, are you? Because you could stop. You could try and like hide your hand, or prevent an armbar grip break by doing that. But he was trying. Respect to him. Do something new. So yeah, Barcelos comes out of this looking great. I feel like this is a nice little coming out performance. I mean, how many people would have seen it? I don't know. But Barcelos has always been a very good all-round fighter and a very clean technician and also dangerous, and never really got the love for it. There was a point where he was on a 5-fight winning streak with, I think, 3 finishes. And this was before his fight with Timur Valiev, which is really good. Go watch that again. And he never really got the respect for it, or never really got... It was kind of like when Vicente Luque was on a 7-fight winning streak or something, and you're going, why is no one talking about this guy who's got a really good style that everyone would enjoy watching? You know, it's me talking about, like, why do people not like kickboxing? But it's got all the things you want and none of the things you complain about in MMA. But who knows? Sadiq Youssef versus Don Shainis. We talked about this on the podcast. I said, last-minute replacement, Don Shainis. Very much overmatched on paper. Sadly, Giga Chikadze dropped out of this fight because he heard that Sadiq Youssef was 5'5" or whatever he is. And he said, yeah, that sounds great. And then he realized that Sadiq Youssef's actually good. So he pulled. No, whatever happened, Sadiq Youssef ended up getting the short straw here. Did exactly what you need to do if you get a last-minute replacement match. Finished him quick. Can move on. Just kind of sucks because he gets the win. But if he wants to start talking about title contention, they're going to go, who have you beat? Who's Don Shainis? But yeah, came out, grabbed a double collar tie right off the bat, started hammering knees in, standing square like a tie on the bag. Poor old Don Shainis was taking a beating, ducked in on his hips. Or I don't know, he just sort of hunched forwards, and Youssef jumped an arm in guillotine, spiked him on his head as he did so, DDT'd him, and Shainis ended up sort of on his side, falling over, and you knew he was done, because you don't let yourself get into positions like that unless you're about to get choked unconscious. And it's like when you watch someone roll to the bottom of Mount in a guillotine. You go, yeah, well, that's probably on that choke because there's no reason to otherwise. What else was on here? Mike Davis versus Vyacheslav Borshev. This one was weird because Mike Davis was the one selling off or trying to sell off a place in his corner this week, saying that he needed money. He's offering sponsorship of his corner, as in you can go as a cornerman as like an experience. You remember Mike Perry did it when he had no money. And then, immediately after the event, he's like, Zuckerberg wrote me a nice DM and followed me back. And you're going, well, do you not see that Zuckerberg bought out the entire arena and you didn't see a penny of it? Bit sketchy. But Mike Davis, he had a great performance against Gifford, one of the most brutal beatings in MMA history. Had a great fight with Mason Jones immediately after that, and then has had a couple of unfortunate cancellations. Herbert Medic, he's been injured for quite a while. It's been the best part of a year, actually. It's been the best part of 2 years since he fought. Fun fighter, good banger, but he was fighting Vyacheslav Borshev, and I've said this before, but it's a freebie if you're any good at MMA, because this guy can't stop a takedown. And apparently he's been training with Team Alpha Male, but you can't see any of that in him. But then apparently he's also had like knee injuries that mean he can't wrestle. I don't want to shit on this guy too much because what he does do is good. I really enjoy his boxing, the body shots and stuff. But when you back an opponent onto the fence and you hammer him with a body shot and he still takes you down from like the hardest position to score a takedown from, they duck in on you as you're throwing body shots as their back is to the fence, and he still just pushes you over. That's problematic. There were so many instances in this match where, if you compare this to, say, Archuleta versus Barzola, when one of them hit the other, it normally, he'd either meet resistance, or he'd catch him dead to rights and he'd run through him, and the other one would use the momentum to roll up or re-attack or try and sweep the guy over or get back up to his feet, you know? Momentum's a huge deal in combat sports, and that's why you can't learn it statically. You know, you've got to be in there doing the aliveness or whatever. But when you watch this fight, Davis will duck in on a takedown. He'll hit resistance in Borshev with like his head in the middle of Borshev's chest or down by his hip, and he'll have both of Borshev's legs with his hands. And then they'll stand there for a minute before he just pushes Borshev over. And Borshev won't use the momentum in any way to like turn to the turtle and start standing up. It just looked like a guy who really doesn't know what he's doing. And then any time that Davis got him down, he mounted him, and that was disastrous for Borshev because rightly he prioritized the punches, but he did that by putting both elbows up, crazy monkey style, or used to call it like answering the telephone. But okay, so think of like a boxing guard, and instead of having your hands by your chin or up by your temples or whatever, you have your elbows high. So he had that going on, but with both arms. And the problem is that at some point to escape mount, the reliable way, you need to get an elbow inside the opponent's knee or on an opponent's knee to perform a knee-elbow escape to stop them climbing up you. Because obviously, if you've got your hands high to begin with, they're just going to crawl up and sit on your chest, which means that all the bucking and bridging you do doesn't affect their weight very much. All the bucking and bridging is effective when they're back on your hips, which you normally need like a frame across their hips with one hand, or one hand in their hip and inside their knee. Yeah, he had absolutely no frames. He'd sacrificed them to have his hands really high and try and stop punches to his head. But it's quite interesting because I got a question on the Boycast last week about bridging off the fence and if it would ever take over as like part of the meta, part of the style. And I said, you know, it's been here since very early on. The bridging off the fence predates the wall walk in MMA, so it's very early stuff. But I think that because it's so old and basic, people forget how powerful it is. Because the example the guy gave was Jiri Prochazka, who was underneath Glover Teixeira, one of the best grapplers, one of the best top players in MMA, one of the best mount players in MMA. You know, very few people finishing people from mount, and that's like Glover's move. And Jiri kept getting mounted by Glover Teixeira, walking himself to the fence with Glover on top of him, and then putting his feet on the fence and bridging. And the thing about doing that is that if you start with your feet on the fence rather than the floor, you can get your hips that much higher. So it doesn't matter about how hard or explosively you bridge. You can just sort of make yourself go into a back roll underneath the opponent, and your head will slip out as you do it. And you saw Glover, one of the most experienced mounters in MMA probably, been to ADCC, world-class grappler in pure grappling. When in the third or fourth round, Jiri puts his feet on the fence, Glover bases his hands out like, I'm ready for this now. And Jiri still goes underneath him because he can bridge so high that he can almost like stand on his own head and slip it out the back door. And you saw that in this fight. Mike Davis had complete control. Borshev showed that he didn't know how to deal with the mount as a position, you know, in a vacuum with no walls. But then Borshev moved himself to the fence, just repeatedly pushing both feet off the floor like a frog. Frog leapt his way towards the fence. Then he turned and put his feet on the fence and bridged over and got out. And when he did throw his body shots and things like that, he looked great. His movement was great. You know, you saw a real difference in the use of movement to set up strikes between him and Davis. Davis was just jabbing, and then he'd drop his right hand like, guess who's going to jail, and throw an uppercut. But it doesn't really matter because Borshev is at this stage where it's kind of like Curtis Millender. You've got into the UFC. Clearly you can beat people on the regional scene, but you're in the UFC, and I think there are plenty of people on the regional scene who would give you a horrible time with their grappling because you can't stop people from taking you down, you know? I mean, they must have to have got here at some point, but it's just such a blatant hole, and there isn't a way you're going to fix it up in the UFC, I don't think, you know, fighting this level of opposition. It's sad because he's got skills that are good, and he should get paid for and are exciting, but he's such a one-sided fighter that, this is mixed martial arts, and there are specialists winning belts and things, but they do have to learn how to navigate the other areas of the game. So what else was on this card? Actually, the prelims were a lot of fun. Guido Canetti managed to cut kick Randy Costa, but underneath a front kick that sort of came very close to his face, and he didn't really blink or anything. But that was neither here nor there. If you're kicking with someone who's kicking and you're throwing low kicks and they're throwing, above the waist kicks, you've got a great chance of knocking them over, which means nothing in Muay Thai. I mean, it means you go, way, and then they stand up. But in MMA, that means you get a great chance of jumping on them and holding them down, as Sadiq Youssef did against Andre Fili, or you get a great chance at them jumping up too quickly and you jumping on their back in the process. And that's what happened. You got the rear naked choke very, very quickly. Brendan Allen versus Jotko was really good fun. Another case for the well-timed bridge. It's not good jiu-jitsu necessarily, but Brendan Allen was holding the lockdown underneath Jotko, and the commentators were going, now he's going to look for an underhook here, and he just went, nope, bridge. And Jotko was out of position momentarily, didn't expect the bridge, and he fell off. It's a real thing that happens. I mean, it's even happened to people like Gordon Ryan, who are good enough that they work to get everything in position to kill the bridge, and still occasionally they'll fight someone like Matthias Deniz. I mean, Matthias Deniz did it against Giancarlo Bodini, whatever his name is, the guy who just went through 4 guys to win ADCC in that division. Matthias Deniz is a world-class jiu-jitsu savant, but he still recognises the place of a well-timed bridge. But Allen got top position, and he grabbed a choke on the way over, no hooks. But, if you're under the neck, I mean, it's kind of like what happened with Randy Costa, Guido Canetti. If you're under the neck, you're under the neck. And I think fighters know when they're dead to rights. So, yeah, got the choke. A good bounce back from the Chris Curtis loss, I believe, of Brendan Allen. Joaquin Silva was a lot of fun against Jesse Ronson. Jesse Ronson, I've seen him fight before, and I remember thinking this then, but he looks like a guy who relies on being a southpaw. It's kind of like when Luis Banya Kane fought in the UFC back in the day. The moment that someone took away just the basic hand slap left straight, he didn't know what to do. He was a southpaw who just had that one southpaw trick and relied on people being like, oh my God, I don't know what to do against a southpaw. Jesse Ronson looks for that left body kick and doesn't really do anything else. So when Silva switched to southpaw, the body kick wasn't there and Silva just lit him up. And Silva was landing good right hooks, good right jabs. But what I really liked was this knee. Normally, if you're throwing like a knee to the head with your lead leg, you either switch step on spot and just bring it up like you would a stepping knee, or you, the one that's very common, you'll have seen Alex Pereira do it. They sometimes call it the Poatan knee. I sometimes call it the Groenhart knee before Alex Pereira became so famous for it, because Middle Groenhart does it constantly just to like close the distance and start throwing punches. But it's where you pump your rear leg as if, and sometimes you can hide it as like a low kick attempt. Sometimes you're pretending you're kneeing with it, but you pump your rear knee up and you use that to carry yourself into the air and lunge forward with your lead knee. So it's like a bicycle knee, But this knee was really cool because he just hopped up with his rear foot and he picked his lead leg up straight. If you're doing the bicycle knee, you're normally leaping towards the opponent up at an angle. And this one just came up like the knee came up straight underneath the guy's chin. It reminded me of a knee that Koji Horiguchi and Raymond Daniels do sometimes, which is they skip their back foot up to their lead foot, and at the same time they sort of leap forward with their lead knee just into the body, straight. But to see it done straight upwards underneath the chin was very, very cool. And he landed it a couple of times. He landed it in the first round and hurt Ronson, and then he landed it in the second round and knocked him out. Bad fights. Chelsea Chandler versus Julia Stoliarenko. Both, it looked just a messy, sloppy brawl. Chelsea Chandler was the one getting tons of hype. Stoliarenko has lost more than half her fights. Stoliarenko is 10-7 and loses all the time, but she came out almost immediately armbarred her and then fell off because she went too hard for the armbar. And then Chelsea Chandler got on top of her. It was a messy, messy fight. And it was a 140, so you're like, why did this even happen? Ilir Latifi versus Olenek was about as bad as expected. Ilir Latifi is another one of these guys like Ovin Prue did briefly, or Jan Vellante, or Jake Collier, which is when you're a sort of a journeyman in the higher divisions that aren't heavyweight. You go, I'm never going to be a world champion, but I don't have to try anymore. So you just get grotesquely fat, but continue to fight in the UFC. It's a really weird blind spot of the UFC's roster. But this fight was not enjoyable. The only joy to be taken from it was that Mark Zuckerberg bought out an arena to watch it. And then Daniel Santos versus John Castaneda was good fun. Daniel Santos, I thought John Castaneda was going to win this. He was kicking the shit out of Daniel Santos to begin with. But almost immediately, Daniel Santos hit a takedown. Castaneda wrapped the head for a guillotine with the arm in. And he used his butterfly hooks to threaten to turn Santos all the way over. Santos managed to throw his weight back, and Castaneda used that momentum to stand up, which was, I mean, we were talking about momentum earlier, but that was a really nice example of that. High kicks as he was back, as Santos was pressing in on Castaneda along the fence. You're not supposed to be able to kick off the back foot, in that if you keep someone moving backwards, it's very hard for them to time a high kick. But you can kick off the back foot. If you watch someone like John Haggerty, he's amazing at kicking off the back foot. He'll do switch kicks off the back foot while guys are walking in on him. But Daniel Santos would work Castaneda to the fence and then pause, and Castaneda would throw up the left high kick and wobble him, and he did it twice in the first round. But at the end of the first round, Castaneda was going ham trying to get a finish, and then 30 seconds left, he stops and looks at the clock and goes back to the fence. And you go, oh dear, he's spent his gas tank there. And then the second round, he came out and Daniel Santos just walked him down and he looked exhausted already. And then Daniel Santos beat him up and got the stoppage, which was, impressive because he'd taken 2 flush head kicks and not adapted. But respect to Daniel Santos. So that was the whole card, and I mean that was 2 cards from the weekend. They were all right. I told you next weekend's card is Alexa Grasso versus Viviane Araújo, which is not a good main event, but you got some fun stuff on there. You got Jonathan Martinez, who I always call like the perfect MMA fighter to study from a technical perspective, because he'll never push himself, he'll never try to get a stoppage, but he does everything about MMA very well. So he's like the fighter's fighter. But he's fighting Cub Swanson, who, while old as hell, still has it in him. Still got that dog in him. Askar Askarov's fighting Brandon Royval. You know that's going to be good. Neil Magny versus Daniel Rodriguez has a chance of being decent. CJ Vergara versus Tatsuro Taira, has a good chance of being good. I mean, it's flyweights and they're both, it's flyweights and they're both good, so that's got a good chance of being fun. Fucking hell, Mike Jackson's got another fight. That'll be disastrous at least. Rafael Assunção is taking on Victor Henry, who's one of the most interesting prospects going at bantamweight right now. And Nick Maximov is going to turn up and high crotch people with the head outside single to a boring decision, while Nate Diaz pretends that that's being gangster. But anyway, if you want to support the podcast, get in on the extra episodes and read Advanced Striking 2.0 and the other breakdown articles I put out. I think I'm going to put out an ADCC influenced one this week, possibly. I'm working on it. Get in on those. Sign up to Patreon, support the podcast. If you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. We answered a load of those on the last Boycast. And if you want to see what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack. We boxing in the metaverse, bless.